So, anyway, how did Handel form his career? And this, I think, is quite significant when we think of the piece we're doing today, the name which escapes, Dixit Dominus. Yeah, he comes from Germany, of course, and as Immanuel Kant said in the later part of the 18th century, the philosophers around the time of Bach and Handel, particularly Christian Wolff, started a process of thoroughness in their thought and action, which has become a German characteristic ever since. So in other words, it's around the late 17th century, early 18th century, that thoroughness and going through things in great detail and more detail than most other people would do, seems to become a trait, at least within that part of Germany, Saxony, Thuringia, and so on. And the way it's shown in music in particular is an interesting counterpoint. What can you combine with something else? And does it work the other way up? And if you play it backwards, does it work? And is it possible to put more notes in, perhaps, just to see whether it works? So this was a trait that both Bach and Handel were brought up with. And Bach, of course, continued to be very German in his approach to music, in exactly the right way of being German, I should say, because one often, once he's added a note to a piece you're familiar with, you often don't want to lose it, even if you like the previous version. But he does tend to elaborate, and I always say that if Bach was still alive today, if they'd managed to sort out his diabetes, which I'm sure they could have done, he would still be alive, and he would be writing the well-toned clavier and the B minor mass. He'd be on the same pieces, basically. They might be a bit longer, but he would have added a few as well. But he's the sort of person who doesn't like to give up. And he had a real aesthetic of perfection, which in German, as you know, is the same word for Vollkommenheit as completeness. So you can actually see how that mentality of perfection and completeness belong together. It's a particular way. We would tend to think of the two as being slightly different, but completeness and perfection belong very much together, and particularly in Bach. And of course, being a religious type, it couldn't be entirely perfect, because that would be probably slightly heretical. Perfection was, as it were, an infinite process. And I don't think Bach actually had the ability to finish a piece of music. If you gave it to him again, he couldn't even copy his music for normal use in church and school. You see him copying something, he clearly hasn't got much time, but he can't avoid changing it. He always tries to make it a little bit better. Handel, on the other hand, is also totally able to change music and rework it, but always for the occasion at hand. Perhaps the real difference between Bach and Handel is that Bach's music works in real time. He's a great performer, great improviser, but it also works sort of outside time. It's just there, and it's like a whole collection of thoughts. It's like an artwork, even if you don't play it or sing it. Handel is wetting. It's always writing for the occasion. It's always music that works and works in real time. If Handel's done badly, it sounds terrible. While Bach done badly, it still sounds terrible, but it doesn't sound as terrible. Handel is very easy to ruin because it's so dependent on working in time and seizing the event and seizing the capabilities of the particular performers that he would capitalise upon. He would really, you could often see this in opera scores, that he changes an aria so that it fits a new singer or fits a particular type of singer with a well-known coloratura or deep notes or whatever. This was common practice for opera composers at the time, but Handel did it particularly well because it completely changes the character of the music. If you know that Thou art gone up on high from Messiah, there are 5 different versions of that. Not because, like Bach, he was constantly revising it and trying to make it better and having new ideas about it. It's because he had 5 different singers over the course of his career and wrote not a completely different version, but a version that would fit whatever that person was doing. So, how did Handel learn how to do this? To write for the occasion, to write for what was available, and tailor it to what he anticipated the moment to be. How did he do this? Well, obviously, a lot of his operatic experience would have told him this, and perhaps his temperament did too. But here I'm speculative. I think there's one very good reason why Handel became such a wonderful composer for the moment and for the forces that he had, and that one reason is the Dixit Dominus. Because this, I think, was possibly one of the biggest mistakes of his early career, which I'll try and show you. do various things. As I say, it's only an idea. So, where does the Dixit Dominus come from? Well, Handel arrived in Rome just a little bit before 1707, when he wrote it in April 1707, and he was very successful there. He did opera, he did oratorio, Italian oratorio, which of course seeded his English oratorio, so he got the idea of oratorio from his work in Italy, in Rome. Cantatas as well, not the Bachian type of cantatas, but usually pieces for one or two singers in Italian and on a secular subject. That's what a proper cantata is. And the other thing, of course, was psalm settings, because many people had church connections, and a good way of, particularly in Rome, of showing off your music was not so much the Mass, which was perhaps more beastily controlled, but the Vesper services, where you could put very complex psalm settings exactly the way Monteverdi did. And he had a patron, he had several patrons, but one of his main patrons was Cardinal Carlo Colonna, who was not just a cardinal, but like many cardinals at that time, also a sort of nobleman, rich man as well, very, very, very rich. And of course it was he, Colonna, who commissioned some of Handel's church music at the time. We're not quite sure exactly which bits of it, probably the Dixit Dominus and Nisi Dominus and so on. There is certainly a central occasion in 1707 when all Handel's psalm settings could have been performed, and this was the festival of Our Lady of Carmel, 16th of July 1707. It was performed in the Roman Church of the Order with Carmel, which of course the Carmelites, Santa Maria de Monte Santo. And certainly the three big psalm settings that he wrote would be appropriate for that service. Another interesting thing about the Dixit Dominus score is that he marks most of the choral parts cappella, which suggests that he had some bumpers for the five main singers. Basically a soloistic form, for five voices, with one, perhaps two, pianists, one might call it, singing with them, to make the choruses more splendid. Now, if we think back to that issue about Germanness, Handel's Germanness, is that he loved counterpoint, he was very good at it, and he was particularly well known at this time in his life for improvising on the keyboard and improvising fugues, which he thought was the hardest thing to improvise. It's very easy to improvise fantasias, and you just do what you like, and as long as the chords are right, it'll sound like a genius. But actually doing fugues is much, much harder, because you have to think about all the combinations and so on. So clearly he had fugal writing at the back of his mind. The other thing, of course, is that he had already started working in the operatic fields and was well aware that Italian singers, particularly those who belonged to expensive courts, were likely to be virtuosos. And virtuoso singers at this time were like virtuoso pianists or violinists today. In other words, they could sing very, very fast. Not only could they sing very, very fast, but they could also make up what they were singing fast. They were also well known in Italy for, if you went to one of the sort of little conservatories of music, you would do exercises all morning, work on your voice, different types of articulation, different types of ornamentation. Afternoon you'd spend working on counterpoint. You learn how to combine them, so that when you hear several things happening at once, you'd be able to improvise around without destroying the harmony. Italian singers were fantastic at singing solo lines when everybody else was singing long notes, or when nobody else was singing at all, particularly in opera. But singing it in a very complex contrapuntal environment is much harder if you're not used to it. And my guess, and it's only a guess, is that performance in April 1707 was probably disastrous, and Handel never wrote anything like it again for voices. There's some difficult choruses, as we all know in Handel, but never impossible. In some ways, the closest is Messiah, which has quite a few Italian duets, very, very fast, but they're still quite easy to sing. They last the right length for a breath. He shall purify. See, I get to the end of it with one breath. All those wonderful choruses, in other words, have the same virtuosity, and they have counterpoint, but they lie in the voice well. Dixit Dominus is a different matter. They sometimes lie in the voice well. Of course they do. And it gives you plenty of time to breathe, of course, all the time, and so on. So it's very interesting that that style Handel, and that it's almost a sort of compositional madness that he has, a manic type of style, which you can sometimes trace in Bach, I think. There's a certain mania in Bach. But Handel became much tamer in terms of understanding performers and tried to, as it were, fit the music like a fitting suit, as they said about Mozart. Mozart, the proudest thing Mozart was of, regarding his own musicianship, was being able to fit an aria to a particular person like a suit, and like a tailor, something we wouldn't think of. So anyway, there we go. We have something that could have been a disaster, and Dixit Dominus could well be a very big turning point in his career. Some little bits of it do reappear. You might, in the first one, I mean, you recognise that already, hallelujah. And the bits of Israel and Egypt that you recognise, the big chorus, for instance, that you get, the second chorus you sing. So several things he recycled, but only little moments of them. Bach is always aiming to try and improve things. Handel, apart from Dixit Dominus perhaps, is always aiming to adapt things so they fit for the new circumstance without any necessary ideal in mind. There's no single Messiah, for instance. There's no version of Messiah which is Handel's, the one that Handel wants, other than perhaps the very earliest one, which was never performed, and then adapted for Dublin. So in some ways, you could say that Handel achieves the greatest compositional perfection when he finishes the piece from the very beginning, because it's all one conception. Bach, on the other hand, is an iterative process of constantly tinkering and composing the same pieces over and over again.